The Enlightenment is an intellectual movement most closely associated with 18th century Europe, but one which more broadly defined can be traced to at least the early 1600s and not before then, to great thinkers such as Galileo and Descartes, who radically challenged the way the Western world saw the universe and mankind's place in it. And in this sense, it's a movement that still exerts a powerful influence today. As both a period and a movement, the Enlightenment follows the Reformation, which saw the emergence of Protestantism. Protestantism, essentially founded by Martin Luther, challenged the authority of the Catholic Church to interpret Christian doctrine and split the Christian Church into competing factions, seriously undermining both the political and moral authority of established religion. The Reformation, in turn, was preceded by the Renaissance, which saw a great flowering or rebirth in art, philosophy, literature, music. It's called a rebirth because much of this reawakening was inspired by a rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman culture that had been neglected or forgotten or lost during the long centuries of the Middle Ages, which followed the fall of the Roman Empire. The sculpture shown here, Laocoon and his sons, is actually an ancient Greek work excavated during the Renaissance. The great artist Michelangelo was present at the unearthing of this statue, and its influence can be seen in many of his works, from the famous statue of David to the paintings on the Sistine Chapel. The Enlightenment built on both these preceding movements. From the Reformation, it drew a willingness to challenge church and even scriptural authority. From the Renaissance, it was inspired to continue the philosophic traditions that began with the ancient Greeks, traditions that frequently put humans, as opposed to God or nature, at the center, a tendency out of which grows both the philosophy we call humanism and the aspect of culture we call the humanities. The Enlightenment is one of those rare ages to have actually named itself. William Wordsworth didn't call himself a romantic poet, and Charles Dickens probably didn't think of himself as a Victorian, but some of the intellectuals during this time really did consider themselves to be in an age of enlightenment. The German philosopher Immanuel Kant used the term to refer to the period in his 1784 essay, What is Enlightenment? There he argued that his age was uniquely positioned to foster independent thinking. He defined enlightenment as freedom to figure things out for yourself, and he challenged his contemporaries to participate in the spirit of the age. Dare to think, he said. Have courage to use your own reason. That is the motto of the Enlightenment. But why enlightenment? What does it mean to be enlightened? If I were to say about someone that person is enlightened, what would I be saying? Most of us would understand it to mean that she has a clear appreciation of her situation. Her mind isn't clouded or overshadowed. She sees clearly. Enlightenment is therefore a metaphor based on the image of light versus dark. To be enlightened is to stand in the light. To be unenlightened is to stand in the dark. This is an especially apt metaphor for the period we're discussing, because in some senses it might be said to have begun with a discovery about light itself, or rather the thing that produces light, namely the sun. In 1543, the Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus published a book advancing what has come to be known as the Heliocentric Theory. This theory was later promoted by the Italian astronomer Galileo, whose articulation of that theory resulted in his arrest and conviction for heresy by the Catholic Church. Now, what is the heliocentric theory? It's pretty simple. To us, it seems almost self-evident. It simply maintains that the Earth revolves around the Sun instead of the other way around. Why was it so controversial? For several reasons. First, passages in the Bible suggest that the Earth is fixed, unmovable, and that the Sun revolves around it. To assert that this isn't the case is to question Scripture. But it wasn't just the Bible, it was church authorities who maintained the belief that the sun revolved around the earth. And questioning the church was even more risky than questioning the Bible. Times were different in the 16th and 17th centuries. Today, if you argue with your priest or your minister or your rabbi, you might annoy some people or be shunned in your house of worship. But in those days, it could get you killed. But the heliocentric theory didn't just contradict religion. It also went against common sense. Think about it. If you weren't taught that the sun revolved around the earth, but you just tried to figure things out on your own, what would be your most likely conclusion? You get up in the morning and the sun is on one side of your house, and at night you see that it's setting on the other. It looks to most people like it's revolving around the earth, not the other way around. So the heliocentric theory calls into question not only biblical authority and church authority, but also the authority of our own senses. That's pretty radical stuff. I mean, think of the implications. If the earth isn't the center of the universe, then man isn't the center of the universe. We're not just talking astronomy here, we're getting into existential questions, the meaning of life. The founder of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, said there were three great blows to human pride over the past few centuries. One of them was Darwin's theory of evolution, which suggested that man evolved from lower life forms. Another was Freud's own theory that our decisions are driven not so much by conscious thought but by unconscious motivations, that we don't really know why we do the things that we do. We'll discuss both of these ideas in more depth later in the semester, but the first great blow to mankind's pride, Freud said, was the discovery that the earth, and therefore we, are not the center of the universe. This idea was a bit of a shock. Imagine, people were discovering that something fundamental to their idea of themselves and their universe, something they had learned from authorities and which they had tested with their own senses, was wrong. Now, this happens every once in a while in the history of ideas. It's called a paradigm shift. A paradigm is a way of thinking, and when it shifts, it can be pretty disturbing. Think of some moments in your own life. Were there ever times when something you believed in turned out not to be true? Something important, something you learned from people whose opinions mattered, or maybe something you figured out for yourself? Some of us remember being taught that the solar system had 9 planets, but a few years ago we were told Pluto wasn't a planet at all, and that the solar system only had 8 planets. That's one example. But a better example might be something like believing in Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. Maybe some of you remember how it rocked your world to learn these were just fairy stories. Learning that the earth revolved around the sun rather than the other way around was a little bit like that for the people of the 17th century. By the way, I hope I haven't shocked anyone with that Easter Bunny revelation. As radical and disturbing as these ideas were, as much as they may have hurt our pride, they also inflated our collective ego, convinced us of our power to figure things out, to improve government, industry, even man himself. You might think of it as the moment in European history that inspired one of the most pervasive notions of our own time, that all of our dreams can come true. That sort of optimism wasn't so easy in the Middle Ages, sometimes called the Dark Ages, when superstition and church authority ruled, when the peoples of Europe were constantly threatened with plague, poverty, and war. But with the rise of all these new liberating ideas, it was starting to look like humans had unlimited potential for improvement. And that idea is still with us today. Though the Enlightenment technically is over at the end of the 18th century, Enlightenment ideas and values remain strong. One might even say that they occupy the heart and soul of Western culture. In fact, as I pointed out in my introductory lecture to this course, that's exactly the claim some people make, that the worship of reason, progress, and optimism are at the center of Western thought. Who said that thing about dreams, by the way? One of the most influential individuals of the 20th century, Walt Disney. You see, the Enlightenment principles practiced by Galileo and Copernicus valued truth over comfort. The idea espoused by Enlightenment writers such as Francis Bacon, who was an early advocate of the scientific method, was that you pursued knowledge wherever it led. And the heliocentric theory was just one of many ideas that would undermine church authority, rewrite common knowledge, and even call into question common sense over the next couple of centuries. The French philosopher René Descartes, who we'll shortly study, would point out that we can't trust authority, experience, or even our own senses, but we have to rely entirely on rational thought processes to arrive at truth. The English philosopher John Locke, on the other hand, would say that the only thing we can trust is knowledge acquired through our senses. In his political writings, John Locke would weaken the monarchy system by arguing that government requires the consent of the people, an idea that would lead straight to the American and French revolutions. Jean-Jacques Rousseau would radically critique culture itself, suggesting that we have to isolate ourselves from the corrupting influences of society to become more authentically human. Mary Wollstonecraft would expose pervasive sexism in culture and advocate the equal rights of women. Voltaire, who we'll also read this semester, questioned not only the authority of the Church, but even the existence of God. And Sir Isaac Newton would discover the mysterious law of gravity, proving that nature could operate like a well-designed machine without the intervention of God. Nonetheless, we'll see it's not so simple. Even Enlightenment thinkers weren't all convinced of the unlimited prospects for mankind. The subtitle of Voltaire's famous novel Candide is optimism. But as you'll see in a few weeks, Voltaire's view of the world is not that optimistic. The tension between the human potential for improvement and our tendencies towards self-destruction will come up again and again. We'll see it, for example, in the Romantic period, in the poetry of William Wordsworth, and in the novels of Mary Shelley. And we'll see it in our own time, in visions of the future such as the movie Forbidden Planet, which imagines a race far more technologically advanced than our own, who are destroyed by their own unconscious impulses, and in novels such as A Clockwork Orange, which imagines a totalitarian government who uses the tools of science and technology to control political opponents, as well as marauding teenagers. The Enlightenment itself might be said to have ended with the French Revolution, which was in some sense a natural outgrowth of Enlightenment faith in human reason. People had concluded that the aristocracy was not only unfair, but that it didn't make as much sense as democracy, so they deposed and executed a king. But while the French Revolution promised a great advancement in human government and freedom, it ended in the Reign of Terror and the rise of Napoleon. Like the two world wars of the 20th century, the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars would illustrate the limitations of human progress, or more precisely, of human rationality. Today, postmodernist thinkers sometimes attack Enlightenment ideas of human progress as naive or even oppressive. But many of us still hold to Enlightenment values. If we don't quite endorse the unlimited optimism of Walt Disney, we still have faith in the human project, in the nobility of mankind, the possibilities of progress, and the hope of an enlightened future. The philosophers, writers, and artists of the 16th and 17th centuries didn't have all the answers, but they fundamentally changed the way Western culture sees and interacts with the world, and many of those changes were undoubtedly for the better.